Welcome to this video that introduces the second process in the Praxis Framework process model. It's called the definition process. You will gain more from this video if you have viewed content on the overall process structure and the Praxis delivery model. These are available in the videos section of the Praxis website or our YouTube channel. Every project and program starts with an idea. Over the course of the life cycle, this is developed and the objectives delivered, resulting in benefits for the person or organization that is funding the work. While all project and program life cycles follow the same basic phases, the way those phases are managed varies considerably depending on the nature of the work. In this video, I'll introduce a process for managing the second phase, known in Praxis as the definition phase. I'll also mention some of the ways the application of this process should be adapted to different contexts. The definition process has 4 goals. These are to build on the work done in the identification process to define the content of the project or program in as much detail as is practical. Establish the value of the work and what it will cost to deliver. Document the approach that the wider team should adopt when performing the functions of project management. Provide sufficient information for the sponsor to commit to starting the work. The definition process is triggered by an authorized brief. This document is produced by the identification process and submitted to the sponsor for approval. Once we have the go-ahead, the first activity is to create a team that will be able to complete definition and deliver the required documentation. The definition team's first job is to use requirements management and solutions development to establish the project or program objectives. Objectives can be expressed in terms of outputs, outcomes, or benefits. The concluding goal of this process is to gain approval to begin the delivery phase. It may seem wrong to start any delivery-related work before approval is given, but in some contexts, there may be long lead times on certain resources needed to complete the work. As long as the financial commitments are low and acceptable, the sponsor may allow some preliminary work to proceed before the full business case is approved. There are 2 sets of documents we need to produce: the governance documents and the delivery plan. The governance documents set out principles of how the work will be managed. They provide a reference point for consistent approaches across what may be an extensive team. The delivery plan includes schedules, risk registers, stakeholder maps, and a number of other documents that collectively address all the aspects of managing the work. The various individual documents are then consolidated under 3 headings: a management plan that sets out operational policies and procedures, a business case that explains the viability, desirability, and practicality of the work, and a delivery plan that shows how the objectives will be achieved. These documents are submitted to the sponsor with a request to authorize the start of delivery. If authorization is given, then the resources needed to perform the first stage of delivery are mobilized. If authorization is denied, this may trigger the closure process, although it may simply mean that more work needs to be done to produce an acceptable business case. For a small, simple project, what I've described so far may seem overly bureaucratic. For a large, complex program, it may seem simplistic. This is because the process needs to be tailored to the context in which it is used. Let's look at the things you need to consider when adapting the process to the Praxis delivery model. Simply put, your documentation needs to be appropriate to the scope and uncertainty of the work. For example, in a low uncertainty simple project, you may have modest guidance for governance but relatively thorough detail on scope. In a high uncertainty project, you may need more on governance but will have less on the detail of scope because that will be discovered throughout the project. On a major program, you will have a lot of scope to cover, even if the level of detail varies across different projects, and will also need good governance policies because of the extensive scope. The bottom line is that you need approval from the sponsor to start the next process, called delivery. This means that the risk appetite of the sponsor and host organization is another factor. What do they need to know before committing funds and resources? In our video on the identification process, I mentioned that in a high agility context, the identification and definition processes may be combined. So let's look at what that might look like. It would be natural to think that agile definition should have fewer activities within it, when actually this version of the process has 1 extra activity. Working with high agility doesn't really change the things that need to be done. It changes the way we do them. The key is to have a light touch when achieving the process's objectives. Firstly, let's address the two obvious changes that result from merging identification and definition. The initial idea now triggers this process, not the brief, and being agile doesn't mean you can ignore lessons learned, so that activity is transferred over from the identification process. Secondly, we'll look at how the activities change. When appointing the definition team, we still need the sponsor and manager, plus any specialists we need to define high-level objectives and boundaries for the scope. Once the team has considered lessons learned, it can start defining scope. This is the key activity as far as adapting the process to the continuum of agility is concerned. The greater the agility, the less detail defined by this activity. At the highest level of agility, only the primary goals are required. Detailed scope will be discovered as part of the development process. Another perception may be that high agility needs less governance, but that is rarely the case. And policies will still be needed on how the work will be managed in areas like communication, risk, and progress reporting. Planning delivery will explain how autonomous teams will operate and how diverse elements of the work will be coordinated. Consolidation still takes place before documentation is submitted for approval. Pre-authorization of work and mobilization are simply performed as appropriate to the context. Finally, the team should also be aware that some parts of the project or program may be suited to high levels of agility and some to low levels. Levels of uncertainty, and therefore the need for agility across the initiative, will not necessarily be constant. All the activities in this process need to take that into account. This has been a quick introduction to the definition processes in the Praxis Framework Process Model. In summary, definition is about building a business case, establishing governance policies, and getting the project or program off to a good start. The breadth and depth of the definition documentation must be appropriate for where the initiative sits on the scope and uncertainty axes of the delivery model. The primary objective is to ensure that the sponsor is confident to agree to fund the work and also confident that it will be executed well. To get more information about this process, please visit the definition process page in the methods section of the Praxis Framework website.